Right now, while you're watching this, something strange is happening. A powerful solar storm is hitting Earth. NASA's tracking satellites just flagged it as severe. That's stronger than the famous storms from back in 2003. At the same time, a stretch of South America is still counting bodies. An earthquake there killed over 4,000 people in under a minute. In that same stretch of weeks, 4 separate volcanoes got bumped up in alert level. They're spread across Italy, Indonesia, the Philippines, and Russia. And a massive typhoon just tore through the Pacific. Its winds hit 180 miles an hour. That's about 290 kilometers an hour. It slammed into islands that still haven't rebuilt from the last storm. None of this is supposed to be connected. The sun sits 93 million miles away. That's about 150 million kilometers. A fault line in Venezuela has never met a volcano in Italy. And yet right now, all 4 are spiking, in the same rough window. By the end of this video, you'll know what's actually linked here. You'll know what's real coincidence. You'll know what scientists agree on and what's still a genuine argument. No cover-up, no doomsday cycle, just the mechanisms, the disagreements, and the data. 4 different agencies are watching 4 different systems. None of them called each other first, but all 4 flagged the same stretch of months. NOAA's Space Weather Prediction Center tracks the sun. The United States Geological Survey tracks the ground. The Smithsonian's Global Volcanism Program tracks the volcanoes. NOAA's Hurricane Center tracks the storms. Here's the actual news buried inside that. The current solar cycle was supposed to be weak. Forecasters predicted a modest peak. Instead, it came in far stronger than anyone expected. That's not a small miss. That's the sun doing something the models didn't see coming. Picture the sun, the crust, and the ocean as 3 machines. They used to sit in separate rooms. Separate scientists studied each one in separate buildings. New research says they might be wired into the same circuit. So, here's the real question this video is built to answer. Is this one connected system? Or is it 4 unrelated disasters that just happen to share a calendar? Stick with me, because honestly the answer isn't a clean yes. The most disputed link on this list is also the strangest one to say out loud. A flare, 93 million miles away, might be able to nudge a fault line here on the ground. Why would anyone even suggest that? The sun's current cycle didn't calm down the way cycles usually do after their peak. It kept firing powerful flares, one after another, for years. One of those flares threw off a burst of solar material moving at nearly 2,000 kilometers per second. That's over 1,000 miles every single second. Then, more recently, an unusually severe radiation storm hit. So what's the actual claim? Researchers at Kyoto University call it capacitive coupling. In plain language, it means this. The Earth and the sky might be acting like a giant electrical capacitor. Here's how to picture it. Imagine a sealed glass jar filled with violently boiling water. The glass already has microscopic cracks running through it. It's right on the edge of shattering from its own pressure. Now apply a strong static charge to the outside of that glass. Water conducts electricity. So, the charge pulls on the molecules inside. Pressure spikes against the glass walls. That invisible jolt is the final push the glass needs to shatter. The glass is Earth's crust. The boiling water is the superheated fluid trapped inside a fault line. The static charge is the solar flare, reaching down through a charged layer high in our atmosphere. There's a simpler way to picture the same idea. Think of a mountain climber's single footstep. That footstep triggers an avalanche that was already loaded and waiting to fall. The climber doesn't create the snow. The sun doesn't create the tension in a fault. It just closes the circuit on one that was already live. I want to be fair to the skeptics here, right away. This is genuinely disputed. The United States Geological Survey believes any correlation is just a statistical fluke. Their position is that earthquakes are driven purely by forces inside the planet. We'll come back to that argument properly in a few minutes. For now, just hold onto the image of the glass. Now let's talk about the second wire in this circuit. This one runs straight through the ice caps. Ice sheets are heavy. That weight presses down on the crust below. It keeps deep magma chambers compressed and stable, sometimes miles underground. As the ice melts, that weight lifts. The crust rebounds upward. The pressure holding the magma down starts to drop. Dissolved gas inside that magma begins to bubble out. Think of it like shaking a bottle of warm soda, then unscrewing the cap. The ice sheet was the cap. Take it off, and the gas doesn't ask permission before it escapes. Here's the proof, piece by piece. First, the ice itself. Satellite measurements show parts of West Antarctica losing up to 3 meters of ice a year. That's nearly 10 feet gone every single year. Second, the history. Geological records show volcanic activity rose 2 to 6 times higher, globally, right after the last ice age ended. Third, what's happening right now? Iceland's Bárðarbunga volcano got elevated to a higher alert level in mid-June. That came after an earthquake swarm tied directly to its melting ice cap. A few weeks later, in the same summer, Italy's Mount Etna kept erupting strongly enough to disrupt air travel across the Mediterranean. Indonesia's Anak Krakatau got raised to a more serious alert level. Hawaii's Kilauea moved to advisory status too. Let that sit for a second. Scientists estimate there are over 100 volcanoes buried under the ice in West Antarctica alone, and that ice is thinning by the meter every single year. Same wire, same circuit. Remove the weight holding something down, and the pressure underneath finds a way out. Now, the third wire runs through the ocean itself. A hurricane is basically a heat engine. It pulls warm water vapor up off the ocean's surface and turns that heat into wind. So, when the ocean runs hotter than normal, the engine gets more fuel than it's built to handle. Right now, tropical Pacific waters are running warmer than average. That warmth is building as weather patterns shift toward an El Niño year, right during the peak of this year's storm season. Pour that kind of heat into a storm, and you get something meteorologists call rapid intensification. That's when a storm's winds jump dramatically stronger in a single day. In plain language, it's a storm hitting a growth spurt overnight. There's a second driver stacked on top of that ocean heat. Back in 2020, international shipping rules cut sulfur pollution from cargo ships by roughly 80%. That pollution used to seed bright, reflective clouds over the ocean. Take it away, and satellites measuring the planet's heat balance recorded a real, measurable jump in warmth staying trapped at the surface. Cleaner air, it turns out, came with a cost nobody priced in. This isn't theoretical. Last year, Hurricane Melissa reached the strength of a Category 5 storm. Its winds hit nearly 190 miles an hour. That's over 300 kilometers an hour. It tied as the third most intense Atlantic hurricane ever recorded. This year, Super Typhoon Bavi crossed 180 miles an hour. It battered islands in the Marianas that were still running on backup generators from the last storm. That same week, in the American Midwest, a flash flood emergency forced hundreds of rescues in southeast Missouri. Scientists connect that to the same warped weather pattern. They call it climate whiplash. Picture the storm surge from a hurricane this strong. It's a wall of water tall enough to swallow a two-story building whole. That's why rapid intensification is the number emergency managers fear most. It doesn't just make storms stronger. It shrinks the warning window people get to run. 3 wires, 1 circuit, a flare that closes a switch already live, a crust that loses its lid, an ocean running hot enough to turn weak storms into monsters overnight. Here's where we need to slow down and be honest. This is exactly the point where these stories usually go wrong. In that same rough window that Venezuela's fault line ruptured, earthquakes also struck near Japan. They struck off Indonesia twice. They struck near the Philippines. They struck out near the South Sandwich Islands, close to Antarctica. That looks like a chain reaction spreading across the planet. It isn't one. The United States Geological Survey is direct about this. Venezuela sits on the boundary between 2 specific tectonic plates. Japan sits on a completely different fault system, thousands of miles away. These systems simply don't talk to each other. Here's the actual base rate. Earthquakes of magnitude 6 or higher happen roughly once every 3 days, somewhere on the planet. Seeing several cluster into the same news cycle isn't proof the planet woke up. It's just what an active planet looks like, on an ordinary stretch, when you happen to be paying attention. This isn't the first time space weather has reached down and touched the ground. Back in September of 1859, an event called the Carrington Storm slammed Earth with the largest geomagnetic storm ever recorded. There were barely any casualties. There was barely an electrical grid yet to fail. But by May of 1921, a similar storm found one. In Brewster, New York, a telegraph operator named Hatch was working at his station. The storm's electrical current overwhelmed his equipment. Newspapers at the time reported that Hatch was, quote, driven away from his instrument by a flare of flame that engulfed the switchboard and set the building alight. A modern risk assessment estimated the cost of a storm that size happening today. The number came out between $600 billion and $2.6 trillion. That's the precedent that turns a string of powerful solar flares from a curiosity into something worth tracking. In April of 1815, Mount Tambora, in what's now Indonesia, produced the largest volcanic eruption in recorded history. Sir Stamford Raffles, a British governor stationed hundreds of miles away, wrote that the first blasts were mistaken for cannon fire. Troops were actually marched out to defend a neighboring post that was never under attack. The eruption and its tsunamis killed around 10 to 11,000 people directly, but the famine and disease that followed killed far more. Ash blocked out the sun. Crops failed worldwide. The total death toll reached somewhere between 71,000 and 121,000 people. 1716 became known as the year without a summer. That's the precedent that turns a handful of volcanoes going on alert in the same summer from a curiosity into something worth tracking. In November of 1755, Lisbon was leveled by an earthquake. Then a tsunami hit 40 minutes later. Then a firestorm broke out, sparked by fallen holiday candles. 3 disasters compounding in a single morning. 85% of the city was destroyed. Portugal's prime minister at the time surveyed the wreckage. He reportedly gave his staff one blunt order: bury the dead and heal the living. That same compounding pattern played out in Venezuela this year. A dual earthquake rupture collapsed bridges. It cut off entire regions before rescue crews could even arrive. That's the precedent that turns a single earthquake into something that can spiral, fast, into several disasters wearing one name. It's worth being honest about scale here. This is exactly where online discussion usually goes wrong. This is not a 12,000-year cycle. It is not the sun preparing to flip the planet's crust upside down in a single day. Nothing in the actual data supports that. We'll get to exactly why in a moment. Here's what actually deserves your attention instead. The current solar cycle genuinely, measurably outperformed its own forecasts. The ice melt mechanism triggering volcanic unrest is settled science. It's backed by satellite measurement and geological record. The ocean heat mechanism behind rapid intensification is settled science too. Only one wire in this circuit remains a live, disputed argument inside real institutions. That's the solar earthquake link. Not fringe, just not settled consensus either. This is vigilance, not panic. 3 real mechanisms, 1 real argument, 0 doomsday cycles. Now let's deal with the wild theories directly. Ignoring them just leaves the loudest voice in the room unanswered. The first theory claims the sun is about to fire something called a micronova, supposedly powerful enough to unlock Earth's crust and flip the continents in a single day. It can't happen. Our sun is a lone, ordinary star. That kind of explosive event requires a very specific setup that our solar system simply doesn't have, and flipping a planet's crust would require overcoming its entire spin. No burst of radiation can supply that kind of force. The second theory claims the United States government triggers earthquakes using a research facility in Alaska. The energy math kills this instantly. That facility transmits a few megawatts of radio power at most. A single major earthquake releases energy equivalent to hundreds of megatons of explosives. That gap isn't close. The strange lights people point to as proof are real, though. They're a documented natural phenomenon called earthquake lights. Rock under extreme stress generates its own static charge right before it breaks. The third theory claims a hidden planet is swinging close to Earth, secretly pulling on the crust. If a body with enough gravity to do that actually existed nearby, it would already be visibly dragging the Moon and nearby planets off their measured paths. Every observatory on the planet would have caught it by now. Now, back to the one claim I promised we'd revisit: the solar earthquake link itself. The kernel of the idea is real. Independent satellite data does show a statistical correlation between solar activity spikes and earthquake clustering. But the United States Geological Survey ran an actual test. They took decades of earthquake dates and shuffled them randomly, 100 different ways. The same pattern showed up in the random data too. That doesn't kill the theory completely. It just means the science doesn't support jumping from correlation to proof. Not yet. So here's exactly what the agencies tracking each wire are watching for. NOAA's Space Weather Prediction Center watches a scale of geomagnetic disruption. Cross a certain threshold and you're in storm territory. Cross a higher one and it's extreme. The United States Geological Survey and volcano observatories watch ground deformation. That's physical movement of the Earth, measured in millimeters a day. They also watch for earthquake swarms crossing specific thresholds. Researchers studying the solar earthquake link watch something called total electron content in our upper atmosphere. A sudden spike there, especially during otherwise calm conditions, is the one signal that could actually move that whole debate forward. And NOAA's Hurricane Center watches something called accumulated cyclone energy. That's a combined measure of storm strength and how long storms last across a whole season. A change in any one of those numbers moves the needle, not the headline, the actual number. Let's be direct about what you can actually do with any of this. Information without action is just anxiety. If you live somewhere in reach of a hurricane or typhoon, rapid intensification is the number that matters most to you. A storm that looks moderate on Monday can turn catastrophic by Wednesday. Know your evacuation route before the forecast escalates, not after. If you live in an active earthquake zone, the ground doesn't usually wait for a warning. Keep a basic kit ready: water, food, and medication for 3 days. Know where your home's gas shutoff valve is. Have a family communication plan for when the phone networks go down. If you live somewhere solar storms could reach your power grid or your GPS, the honest advice is simply awareness, not alarm. These events can knock out satellite navigation and radio communication for hours, but they're not something you personally prepare for the way you'd prepare for a storm. And if none of that applies to you directly, here's one universal action. Know which agency actually watches your specific risk. Know exactly how their alerts reach you, whether that's a phone alert, a siren, or a broadcast. The lesson from every precedent we just walked through is the same one. The death toll from a natural disaster is never just the event itself. It's the event, combined with a human decision made long before it ever arrived. So back to the question we opened with. Is this one connected system, or 4 unrelated disasters sharing a calendar? The honest answer is neither, cleanly. 2 of these wires are settled science. The ice cap's unloading pressure onto volcanoes, and the ocean's overheating storms, with cleaner shipping air adding real, measured fuel to that second one. One wire, the solar earthquake link, is a genuine live argument between real scientists. It uses real data. It has not been resolved either way. None of that is a hoax. None of it is a doomsday clock. What it actually is a planet where systems we used to study separately are increasingly being read as parts of the same circuit. Some of that reading is confirmed. Some of it is still being argued over, right now, by the people whose job it is to get it right. Right now, while you're finishing this video, the sun, the crust, and the ocean are all still doing exactly what we just walked through. The sun is still firing. The ground is still settling. The water is still warming. The sun doesn't create the tension in a fault. It just closes the circuit on one that was already live. That's true whether or not the argument around it ever gets fully settled. We'll keep tracking every wire in this circuit as it develops. The next reading from NOAA's Space Weather Center. The next volcanic advisory from the United States Geological Survey. The next atmospheric signal that either strengthens the solar earthquake case or weakens it for good. 4 systems, 1 circuit, some of it proven, some of it still being argued, all of it worth watching closely. Because the ground under a claim like this is exactly where the real story sits.